Good? Okay. Welcome, everyone. We'll call the meeting of the Porterville Area Development Authority to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Tribe member Shine Nieto.
Here.
Tribe ex-official member Neil Pyron.
Present.
City ex-official member John Lawless.
Present.
City member Milt Stowe. He was said that he would be here a little late. Vice President Gary Santos. Here. And President Monty Reyes.
Present? What's that? Oh, and then Member Rodriguez.
And member Rodriguez, City member Rodriguez doesn't appear that he's on or here.
Okay. Thank you. At this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. That brings us to oral communications. This is the opportunity to address the Porterville Area Development Authority on any scheduled matter. Unless additional time is authorized, all commentary shall be limited to 3 minutes per individual and no more than 15 minutes total. Do we have anyone that would like to come forward for oral communications? I don't see any in the council chamber. Is there anybody on Zoom?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to scheduled matters.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have 7 scheduled matters before the authority this afternoon. If we may, could we make a change in the order of the items, if that would be okay? If we could take number 2 first, which would be the resolution adopting procedures consistent with AB 361 and Ralph M. Brown Act.
Sure. Consensus from the board to take item number 2 first? Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. So scheduled matter number 2, now number 1 for consideration of the authority is adopting procedures consistent with AB 361 and Ralph M. Brown Act, which allows this authority to meet and allow participation virtually, as we see Member Nieto and now Member Stowe now as present. So recommendation would be for adopting the resolution that would be good for the next 30 days. I believe it's through March 22nd.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a motion? Okay. Motion by Vice President Santos. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Member Stowe. Unless there's any more discussion, please call for the vote.
Member Stowe. Member Stowe.
Aye.
Member Nieto.
Aye.
Vice President Santos. President Reyes.
Aye. Passes 4-0. Thank you. Next item, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Item number 2 would be the approval of the draft minutes of the meeting of January 21st, 2022. Recommendation would be to review the draft minutes and consider adoption.
Okay, thank you. I hope everyone's had a moment to review the minutes. And if there are any corrections, I will accept those for consideration now. Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I should make a motion to approve the minutes, Mr. President.
Thank you. We have a motion, and if there's a second. Okay. A motion by Member Stowe, second by Vice President Santos. Please go ahead and call for the vote.
Member Stowe.
Aye.
Member Nieto. Member Nieto,
Aye.
Vice President
Aye.
Santos, President Reyes.
Aye. Passes 4-0. Thank you. Next item, Mr. Lawless.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next scheduled matter in order is consider reorganization of the Board of Directors under its bylaws. At its meeting of February is the considered reorganization and appointment of the President, Vice President, and Secretary for the Board of Directors. And happy to provide any further assistance or answer any questions the board may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawless. And as noted, the annual reorganization happens at the February meeting. So at this point, any discussion or nominations for the reorganization will be accepted at this point.
Mr. President, unless there's some urgent reason to change, I'd like to leave the slate as it is, and I'll make a motion to do so.
We do have one vacancy, which would be for Secretary, so there would need to be nominations for Secretary.
Okay.
You could make that motion, though, for the president and vice chair, or chair
Okay.
and vice chair.
I will make that motion for chair and vice chair, unless there's other nominees that.
And thank you for the presenting a nomination for the two seats. Are there any other nominations?
If there are no other nominations, you can go ahead and treat that as a motion. By Member Stowe.
That was a motion, actually, but
Okay. So there's a motion, and then Vice President Santos seconds the motion. So we can proceed with that action and then move on to the secretary. So go ahead and please call for the vote.
Member Stowe,
aye.
Member Nieto,
Aye.
Vice President Santos, President Reyes.
Aye. Passes 4-0. Thank you. And now there's a vacancy for the position of secretary. And I'd like to thank Raylene Clower for her service in that role. As she's come off the board, we now have to fill that position. So are there any nominations for secretary?
Mr. President, I'll nominate Shane Needle.
Okay, we have a nomination for the secretary seat, Mr. Nieto. Are there any other nominations? Okay, hearing none. Would you like to express that? I'm sorry, please go ahead.
I was just going to say exactly what you were going to say, which is you can actually ask if that would like to be made into a motion.
So is that your wish, Vice President? Okay. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, second by Member Stowe. So please go ahead and call for the vote.
Member Stowe,
Aye.
Member Nieto,
Aye.
Vice President Santos,
Aye.
President Reyes.
Aye. Passes 4-0. Congratulations, Secretary Nieto. And that brings us to the next item.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next item in order is consider city reimbursement eligible expenses and construction update of the tertiary treatment wastewater facility, collection system, and recycled waste infrastructure project. Submitted for consideration for the board's consideration has been a reimbursement request of $852,000, which in addition to the documentation contained in your packet, there is other materials that are still being reviewed between city staff and the owner's representative with regards to the certified payroll. That would be the supporting documentation behind substantiating the expenses seeking reimbursement for. I'm going to ask Mr. Sanchez to provide further information on that, Mr. Knight as well in their review. So before the board for consideration has been the request for reimbursement. It'd be the request of city staff that this item be carried over to the March meeting as the underlying documentation that's been submitted to substantiate the expenses are still being reviewed. Happy to answer the questions or further deliberation of the item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawless. Are there any questions for staff at this point? Please, go ahead.
If we roll this over, Mr. Lawless, will that number increase at the next meeting?
It could. There may be other reimbursement requests that may be forthcoming.
Reimbursement request, or is this our second? I can't remember.
It's the first one.
And we're reviewing items that are tagged in yellow. Is that what it is?
No, there's other supporting documentation called certified payroll that's being reviewed that ensures that, for example, in some of the lines, you'll see a summary number of $10,000 as an example that shows a certain cost associated, but there's an underlying document that certifies the payroll and benefits that go towards that, which has to be certified consistent with the Department of Labor approval process.
Prevailing wage requirements.
Prevailing wage requirements, correct.
Question, Mr. President?
Go ahead.
Also, Mr. Lawless, I know the meeting was specifically passed on for another week, so we could turn all this in a timely manner. I'm sure our staff, got it to you guys. Is there a reason why? Because I had a conversation with the president here over the phone, and that was the general idea, to get all the information so we can have an approval today.
There are errors in the submitted documentation.
Okay.
You want to speak to that further, Mr. Chancellor?
Yeah, we haven't quite finished the entire review, but a couple of things that jumped out immediately were no fringe benefit statement, and then there are other deductions in another category, and there have to be certain attachments to describe what other consists of. And again, with it being the first one, it's just nailing down all the trade wages and making sure they're all meeting the DRR classifications. And as it was asked before, if another request is submitted to increase the reimbursement, it's totally allowable. It just means more certified payroll has to be reviewed and make sure that that is correct before that additional amount is reimbursed.
And how long does it take for your guys' review process to go through?
This first one is probably about a couple weeks. The next, and then it should speed up after that to like within a week. So that'd be something to take into account as they are submitted to provide us enough time to review it, so that it could all be in an acceptable format, so that during these meetings it can be considered for reimbursement.
So we have our meetings on the third Friday of every month. So if we submitted, so we need to submit it to you guys by end of the first week then, and it'll be ready for approval on the meeting date? Is that sufficient enough time?
Right, or I don't know how they if you have like a month closing. We
Typically, that would be about a month from the meeting, just looking at the calendar, right? So, because it's the same day, so you're having your meeting on the same day as the previous PATA meeting. So it's like a month lead time. Is that what I'm understanding?
that'd be
That's what you're
recommended, yeah,
proposing?
that all the reimbursements be to the end of the month, so that when it's submitted, it'll be reviewed in a timely manner. But at this point, to respond to that question, we don't have detailed comments because we're in the middle of the review.
I guess my question is, this is unusual. Inspection is one thing, right? It's an administrative thing. More often than not, certified payrolls are the things.
So, Mr. President,
So we're gonna have gaps because I just got going on number two, because I read over.
Excuse, I think you may have to step to the microphone. I believe the members on Zoom aren't able to hear your comments.
I guess I would just ask that whoever is actually looking at the documents in a timely manner, and responding directly to us, we can answer. As opposed to waiting 3 weeks and then here's a set of comments, and then we're gonna go back through another 2 to 3 week iteration. So currently, 800,000, I've got $1 million pay app that just hit me. So that's pay app number 2. So now our exposure is 1.8. So it's a question of what is the specific item? That's really, because we can do, I was planning on going and doing interviews on Monday before I go to the fabricators, so, just to qualify that one item. So,
Yeah, and what we're
I
just,
understand, the administrative detail, but, we're now starting to get into an impact on some other issues.
in this process, we hold all contractors too on city projects, so it's not like we're,
And these guys are filing their
Scrutiny.
DIRs,
Yeah.
so, I mean,
yeah. But no, I shared that form with you of what is expected in the certified payrolls, and it's,
pretty generic, the document, but I
Yeah.
mean, that would have been great a long time ago, but that's where we need to collaborate. If we can get it done, I think it's just more the collaboration.
right.
And from gathering what you're saying, and as well as the staff, I think there's probably two separate issues happening. There's the initial filing and the format in which that has to be received in order to be acceptable, not just for this time, but every time going forward. But then there are the, say, variances or one-off issues that can be discussed after the items are reviewed. I think that in this initial attempt, I think it's probably more crucial to have everything as correct as possible, which I think is the goal, especially as we move forward. Any future delays can be alleviated by making sure the format is in a certain condition or agreeable circumstance, or however we would have it. So I think that, as I guess the fortunate thing is that since the meeting was delayed, there's only 3 weeks until it can be considered again, but that I understand the inconvenience.
Special session, right?
That is something that can be done. And I think the bylaws would say that the president can call a meeting if that were needed to happen. So, and that's definitely something that is allowable. So we can, hopefully the list of format needs will be complete enough to be able to avoid this in the future. Although, there will be things that will be reviewed periodically, as with probably every project.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Sure.
I think too, so part of the comment was, we received the initial request for disbursement, and that initial request for disbursement came through without certified payroll. And so there was a little bit of a lag in time in getting that certified payroll following that initial email. And so appreciate, getting that pulled together. And then as soon as we received that, I believe we received it like on Thursday. I think we had, due to the 3-day holiday, yeah, so then we had comments of it was incomplete on Tuesday, just after initial review. The details, haven't been shared yet. I understand that, but I think just much like we've talked about, getting through this first process, understanding what all needs to be submitted to have a complete package, that's the initial hurdle. I think we can review this package as it is, and then with your statement of just receiving the next one, knowing what we've already been through, make sure we have that information and submit it over as package number 2. We'll keep it separate so it doesn't belabor, but then, who knows, we may be able to come back to the next meeting and approve both packages as everything's complete. So I would just, we're working through these final details. There's just a couple things there we need to work through on the other expenses, but I don't think it's going to be a major issue. It's just a matter of getting the chance to go through everything completely.
It'd be good to get the specificity of
Right.
what are the open items.
Right. And some of that's difficult for us because, what's being submitted. And that's what this initial process will be, is establishing, you know, what that information is, what the detail is, and once we fill in the gaps, I feel it's going to be a lot smoother process to get those details ironed out.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
No problem.
One more question.
Please.
Mr. President. So just so I'm aware and I have an understanding, being that this is a tribal project, you know, partnership with the city, is this any different than any of your other city projects?
We're treating it like a city-managed project.
So you guys are pretty used to, I guess, getting all this data and stuff like this on a project basis then, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and
So
and
this
it's
is-
not
this is pretty
uncommon
much-
for, it's not uncommon for a developer to do lots of master infrastructure that's subject to reimbursement.
So this is pretty much routine for you guys? Okay.
And I think it's important that this process be as efficient as possible, because we talk about 850, I think it's going to be upwards of 30 million that this board ends up processing.
And thank you, staff, for some of the clarifications. And just I'll just comment that there's no benefit to holding something unnecessarily. But I do think that the first one should be the golden example of how it happens. That way, as mentioned, up to $30 million will be passing through. So I think it's in our best interest to make sure that it happens, at least initially, in a certain format, which is definitely no critique or comment on the way it was presented, because as with most things, the initial attempt to get something through, and especially with something as unique as this body, it can be understood that there could be some delay, and there is absolutely a mechanism to call special meetings, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to work this out and as presented, or as suggested by staff, have multiple packages presented at a future meeting. But at this time, I'd like to ask any of the members on Zoom if they had any comment.
Well, I have a question. Does this mean that we're gonna have to have a special meeting once this document is reviewed and approved? Just so, I don't know if the contractor can last another month or whatever for payment, but is it gonna be necessary to have a special meeting? Or are we gonna be okay with just approving it on the next meeting?
And that's a question that I believe, according to the bylaws, that I could recommend another meeting, but I think that at this point, I would defer to staff and the contractor to be able to get the list of specifics to see if that can fit and what the need is, if the immediate need is. Obviously, that's an option to call a meeting, but hopefully there's a possibility that we could take both packages at the next meeting. But so I guess that remains to be seen, and I would call that meeting upon the suggestion of staff and their conversations with the contractor.
Yeah, to call such a meeting would require 24-hour notice. So whatever, if it's determined that you know, let's say all 852,651 or whatever the number is substantiated according to or whatever the number is, that we could do that with a 24-hour notice.
And with our previous action for the extension to do virtual meetings, that it could be a relatively quick meeting if unless there's any other business that happens in that. So that is a possibility. So any other comments from members of the board? Okay. Seeing none.
I was going to recommend just kind of an update on the status of the construction of the project. I think that'd be timely for the record. So, well, Mike or Sean, whoever.
Sure, and so so if possible, a brief update on the progress of the project.
As some of you may be aware, weather events through the Christmas period had negatively impacted a lot of the soils in and around the tertiary plant. That being said, the work that was conducted through January was limited to some clearing and grubbing, establishing of engineering controls, and a lot of administrative submittals and material purchasing. That said, work really picked up in February. So the work in February has been the installation of a lot of the recycled water and water line that's not in the right-of-way of, say, Edison Court or West Street. Also constructed was the rough construction of lift station 12, which is next to the sports complex, and we've initiated construction at lift station 7, which is in the airport property. The primary site has been fully cleared and graded, so it actually looks like a tertiary project site now. So the tank ring was over-X'd and then reconsolidated in with the lifts necessary. Off-site materials have been procured for the million-gallon tank. As I kind of alluded to earlier, they're initiating their work, and it's starting next week. So that requires a site visit, get pictures, start getting all that confirmation of materials. That's all off-site. So that's really kind of the work to date. In respect to the work with the city on the project through February, there's been some changes that are being discussed that will result in change orders to the project. Specifically, city staff had identified with some, what I would consider reasonable requests for the installation of additional valves. I've asked for a ROM on that. We've kind of been going through that this week. That is going to result in a delay in the work advancing into Edison Court or on West Street until it's finalized. And, we've got clear direction to the contractor on the change direction. In addition, there's a much higher level of coordination between the city and the project on site itself that has ensued because of construction starting. So that's really kind of where we're at today. Looking forward into March, I would say the construction on site, you're going to start seeing more reinforced concrete placed at the tank ring. You're going to see more work at the 2 lift stations. There's going to be more of the actual distribution pipe, which is in the ground. Once it's buried, you don't see it, but you'll see a lot of the heavy equipment that's trenching and installing to date. So I anticipate probably getting out into Edison Court once we've clarified the final design directive on the valves. We are coordinating with SCE because we will be impacting the access to their sites. So that'll be a 1-lane closure on Edison Court. So we're all pretty, I would say, cognizant and coordinated in that effort. So between ourselves, the city, and the contractor. So any questions from the panel?
Any questions from the board?
I was just going to add, I apologize. One of the items that came up in there was during the site grading of the TWSF, we had the obstruction of the power supply for the runway lights. We had a very successful working relationship with the FAA and between the contractors out there, and the workaround on the temporary service for the runway lights was completed and switchover was done. And it was a great collaboration between all parts to get that situation resolved, to allow the clearing and grading to continue. So I really appreciate everybody's effort and the cooperation in getting that completed.
Actually, that cutover, as Mike alluded to, was well coordinated between ourselves, the city, the airport. There's zero issue. I think there's minimal downtime on the lights during the cutover. No hurt. I think it was timely response. I mean, everybody jumped in. It is a time impact to the project. The critical nature of that is the resources on the tank. So currently that's pushing off the erection on site of the tank because we were kind of missing erection windows based on the original schedule. So we're tracking that. The work for the cutover is tracked on a time and material basis with day tickets. So we can quantify that work. So.
Okay. Are there any additional questions?
I have one last one. After you guys review everything and it gets approved, How long does it take for the check to go out after the approval process is done?
So you have 2 dates during the month where you issue checks normally? Okay. Okay. All right.
Can Marie, was it Marie that was speaking? Can she turn her mic on, or can somebody, I don't think the Zoom people could hear. Thanks.
We do have a check run on the 10th of each month and around the middle of the month, and another one at the end of the month. And also, we are able to wire funds if that's, acceptable.
It might be best, given the magnitude of funds involved, to have a wire transfer, and so we're not waiting around for $1 million checks.
I can get that coordinated with the contractor in the city, so you've got accounts and all that to route it.
Okay, and yeah, I mean, that's a good consideration to have, especially now that we're aware of the check run dates. And that also, thanks for your question previously, Vice President, about how long the timeline that things take. I think that check run definitely plays a factor into when the final payment is made. So I know that we've been given a recommendation to carry this to a future meeting, whether that's regularly scheduled or in the circumstance that a special meeting is requested. That's been the recommendation, but I think we probably would need to take an action on doing that, or
Yeah, if the action would like to be, if you would like the scheduling of a special meeting, once it's determined whatever amount that is, we can, if that's the action taken, then staff can consult with the chair to call a special meeting. Or at the worst, that it'd be in the next regularly scheduled meeting, if you want that to be the action.
Can we wait till the next, do we have enough time to wait till the next scheduled meeting?
Working capital and contractors is a touchy item.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're gonna need a special meeting soon.
so we will, and again, we'll, I think that's probably the, do we need specific action on that, or is consensus enough to hold it over to
I think I'd be satisfied with if the direction of the board is for there to be the scheduling of a special meeting. Once that is determined, then we'll notify the chair or the president that we need to schedule a meeting.
okay, yeah, I believe that's in the best interest of everyone to.
Maybe that's consultation between the president and vice president of, okay, at least 24 hours, when are we going to do it? And when can we get a quorum?
Yeah, and there will need to be some coordination between the vice president and myself just on availability and things.
Right.
So I would imagine that we would be able to work through that. But I think it's in the best interest of this body to take the time that we need to look through these documents.
Yeah, so that, when I say 24 hours, so if a meeting is at 3 o'clock on a Friday, we have to have all the materials prepared and distributed at 3 p.m. the day before. It's not, well, let's call it the meeting we need to have the agenda and materials distributed at that 24 hours before that meeting.
Duly noted.
Just saying, that's the rules. That's the public transparency measure.
Okay, so is the board satisfied with that direction?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Member Stowe, you're okay with that? Okay, thumbs up means good. So thank you for the discussion and appreciate the input. And again, there's no benefit in delaying this payment, and just a greater benefit in making sure that we're on track for future payments to be made at the time they're needed. So thank you. Next item, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next is the Storm Drain Recharge Retention Basin Project update. And Mr. Ridenour and others can probably provide more to that. I know that before the City Council at its meeting on Tuesday is going to be consideration and adoption of the environmental impact report for this project. We have received a comment letter from State Division of Dams as they want to review the project to see whether or not it falls within their purview for modifications. And they're doing this under the size of the facility, not the height of the facility as you customarily think of a dam. So given that the number of acre feet of water that this facility could retain, they want to review whether or not they have purview of it. They may make some recommendations in like a spillway thing in case there's more water in there than they're comfortable with. But is that a fair? I'm going to defer to others in the environmental and the engineering side of that.
Right, yeah, and I had a couple preliminary discussions with an engineer at the Division of Safety of Dams. It looks like everything's going to be okay, but we're doing a formal submittal so they can give us a formal jurisdictional determination that it will not fall under state control. So we should expect a response back within the next few weeks.
Yes, and as Mr. Lawless noted, we'll have our public hearing on Tuesday evening for consideration of the mitigated negative declaration. Pretty straightforward, and so we have that it's been published. It's had the public noticing, and so we've received, like I said, one comment. Even in response to that comment, even if there is a desire or a need for a design change, it's not expected that design change would have an impact on the environmental analysis, and so we should be good to go after Tuesday, after it's considered, if the council approves it.
It's my understanding that facility is 100% designed, right? Ready to go to bid.
Thank you, staff. Are there any questions from the board regarding this item? Member Stowe, any questions regarding this item? No? Okay. Secretary Nieto, any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. And this is just an update, so no action required?
No.
All right.
But this will be one that we have reimbursement costs on, which are entirely city funded. So
Next item, please.
thank you, Your Honor. Next item would be local roads improvement coordination. There was a meeting prior to this as part of a coordination meeting between the city and the tribe in regards to roads. There's been a determination to have a subcommittee meet representative of the city and the tribe to evaluate what has been the, I would say, generally accepted road improvements in and around in support of the project, as well as potential alternatives, which I don't think that meeting's yet been set, but I would say that's a providing of an update as to where the status is of local road improvements.
Okay, thank you.
I would say that city staff went and did a overlay of Teapot Dome between 65 and, within the city jurisdiction, between 65 and Newcomb, I believe, right? Just to the east of Newcomb? Yeah. Or west of Newcomb, which is within the city jurisdiction boundaries.
Okay, members of the board, any questions for staff regarding this update? I know that we've been presented with some information. There'll be a future meeting of a committee or subcommittee that'll be discussing some of the coordination. But are there any questions you would like to present here today? And I'll start with Vice President Santos.
I just want to make the comment. This is the committee we chose earlier, Chairman. The committee we chose earlier. This would be from the tribe side. It'll be Chairman Neil Perone, Councilmember William Garfield, and the attorney Kerry Patterson from our side to form that committee.
pending an action.
Yeah, we'll be sending you the city a formal notification and request.
Okay. Great, and we'll be assigning the representatives, of course. And thank you for identifying the representatives from the tribe, and we'll be assigning representatives from the city, and hope to use that group as a way to not only share information, but help expedite the process and any questions answered as far as the coordination. So thank you for that. Are there any additional questions from the board that's on Zoom?
I have none at this time.
Thank you. And I see Member Stowe shaking his head, so no questions there. Any further comments from staff or? Okay. And that's an update, so no action needed there. And we can move on to the next item.
Final action, just as a update on the Thule River Tribe Active Transportation Plan. TCAG has selected and took action at its meeting to select 4 creeks to prepare the active transportation plan. Dave Duda, I think is his name, did I say that right, is going to be the lead. And I don't know, he said he's done work, well, 4 creeks has indicated they've done work with the tribe, and it's been characterized as been favorable. So that's who's a local firm that's been engaged to prepare that plan. They have a pretty aggressive, which I think they look to begin outreach efforts to both city and tribe representatives for that. Identified, and that's what I did want to get some confirmation for, has been Tribal Council Member Garfield as a point of contact, but if that needs to be somebody else, I'd like to be able, indicating that was a representative for TCAG to work with, but I've also either recommended Chair Perone or others that may be identified. That's really for whatever is the tribe's interest on that.
No, go ahead. Yes, recently in a duly called meeting for the tribe, Councilmember William Garfield will be the contact for the TCAG.
So that will probably be, and I know that they're soon looking at scheduling through him then coming up to the reservation, having from the tribal council provided feedback on what are the needs and beginning the outreach process of what the community is looking for in focusing on bicycle and pedestrian improvements. That's the primary, and then secondary is looking at opportunities between in the casino and city airport area for other active transportation. And this would be kind of a plan that would identify many improvements of which applications can be prepared in upcoming, and the next cycle's coming up just this summer, which I know Mr. Smalley is very motivated to have at least one project submitted out of this plan. Would prefer it to be one on the reservation for an improvement. And the reason I say this is that the way ATP monies are programmed is that you have to apply to the state, but it's a very competitive, which I'm not discounting that. And there may be a strategy of putting one. We went through this on our side with the Butterfield Stage Corridor, submitting one plan of everything and then breaking it down into subsections for eligibility of funding, because there's point systems that get assigned to things. And so there's some strategy in making that application. But if something's unsuccessful in being funded at the state level, there are ATP funds that are programmed at a much smaller level at the Tulare County level, which might be $3 or $4 million versus, $400 million at the state level. So within that 3 or 4 million at the local level is county, city projects, and certainly wants to ensure that there's a tribe project and then what happens is that there's looking at the points that projects have. So there's, from the last ATP cycle, there's some projects that are still there, and how those projects might improve their score. So I just know that that's one of the things that he's really trying to strive for, is to ensure that there's a project that is there for funding in the next cycle, which comes around this summer.
Okay, great. And I think that's beneficial because on those trips, once projects are identified, it's not like they just vanish from the radar. They stay on, and as you mentioned, maybe given some opinion as far as how to improve the project for future approval, and then once that system is become acclimated to that system, I think it becomes even easier to look for future projects. So I think that's a great benefit.
The only cautionary part of this I put is with funding is it's about a, what, 3-year? What's the? No, but it's like the next year. What's the lead time? Is it 2 years? So if it's awarded, let's say you apply in June and you're awarded in October, let's say, it's at least, I'm going to say it's 2 years before so you're put into a funding cycle. So even though this is the application timeline, it's still 2 years out before that money actually shows up for you to do the project that's been identified. And I'll use Butterfield Stage Corridor as the example. So city received an $8 million award, but we're just now coming into beginning that money becoming available for the city's project to do, even though it's been more than a year since that award happened.
So I'll just ask the question, since you had mentioned that there's money available in smaller increments from the county. Is the time cycle for that similar, or?
It comes afterwards, so they look at all the projects that were submitted to the state that were not funded and the score that was assigned, and then they evaluate that then for funding. And complementary to that is there's preference points shown at the local level if there's Measure R monies that are used as a match. And so I'll use Butterfield Stage Corridor. That's one of, if we hadn't been funded at the state level, there would have been priority shown to the city of Porterville with Measure R matching, because that's a local sales tax measure for supporting funds.
Okay.
But I know that this is an important plan that to TCAG and to Mr. Smalley specifically.
Great. I'm glad he's taken an interest in that. Are there any questions from the board regarding this item? Okay. None from Vice President Santos. None from Member Stowe. Secretary Nadeau?
I don't got any.
Okay. And that's the last item on the agenda. So that brings us to other matters. I'll go ahead and start with Vice President Santos.
I have no other matters right now.
Okay. Member Stowe, any other matters?
I have nothing, President.
Okay. Secretary Nadeau?
I have none at this time.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just thank everyone for attending today and participating in the meeting. Those that are guests here in the council chambers, as well as all the members who were here physically, as well as on Zoom, as well as the participating in the reorganization. And again, congratulations, Secretary Nadeau. Welcome to the board, and look forward to the next meeting. Our regularly scheduled meeting is March 18th, although as we have discussed, there could be a potential a sooner meeting called than that. So again, thanks everyone, and we are adjourned.